When did it hit you that your parents viewed you as a possession, not a person? Can you imagine the crushing realization that your own father sees you not as a person, but as property, a mere transaction? Because that's precisely what happened to me. The day he locked me in our basement for refusing to marry a man almost twice my age. I was 21, fresh out of my third year of university, and home for summer break. My father had been acting strangely for weeks, constantly hinting at some amazing opportunity. How our family was finally going to ascend, move up in the world. I foolishly thought he meant a brilliant business deal. Turns out I was the business deal. Raphael, my father's 48-year-old business partner, arrived for dinner that night. I'd encountered him a few times at my dad's company events, and honestly he always gave me the creeps. The way his eyes would linger just a little too long when he thought no one was looking. I never understood my father's insistence that I attend those dreadful corporate gatherings until that evening. Halfway through the meal, my father launched into his pitch. He gushed about how Raphael had always admired me, how he'd be an excellent provider, and how incredibly lucky I was that such a successful man was interested in someone like me. My stomach churned. I felt utterly sick. Raphael just sat there, a chillingly calm smile plastered on his face, as if this was all perfectly normal. Then my father pulled out a small velvet box. He announced that Raphael had asked for my hand in marriage, and he, my father, had already given his blessing. I thought it was a sick, twisted joke. My eyes darted to my mother, hoping for some sign of sanity, but she just stared blankly at her plate. My younger brother Hayden wouldn't meet my gaze. A choked laugh escaped me. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. Then stronger. "You can all go to hell." That's when my father's face contorted. I'd seen him angry, but this was different. Violent. He leaned across the table, his voice a low growl. "You don't have a choice." He spilled it then. Raphael was offering a staggering $2 million to merge our family businesses, sealed with our marriage. $2 million. My $2 million. I am not for sale. I practically screamed, pushing back my chair, desperate to escape. But Raphael was faster. He grabbed my arm, his grip like steel, and snarled, "I've been patient long enough. Your father promised me." Then my hand shot out, seizing the nearest object, a heavy wine glass, and I smashed it hard against his face. Everything erupted. My father completely lost it, his face turning purple as he bellowed about how I'd ruined everything. How I was nothing but an ungrateful bitch who couldn't comprehend the sacrifices he'd made. Raphael was bleeding. His words slurred as he muttered something about taming me. My mother? She was just a crumpled, weeping mess in the corner. I tried to run, but my father's massive hand clamped onto my arm, and he dragged me struggling down the stairs to our basement. It was finished, a former rec room with a bathroom but no windows. Now it was where my father stored his precious collectibles. He shoved me inside, the force sending me stumbling, and declared, "You can come out when you're ready to apologize and accept your responsibility to this family." The click of the lock echoed in the sudden silence. I screamed. Screamed until my throat was raw, until my voice gave out. No one came. I spent those first few hours pounding on the door, begging, pleading to be let out. My phone was upstairs. Useless. This can't be real, I kept thinking. They can't just keep me here. Someone will realize this is insane. But nobody came. I could hear their muffled movements upstairs, the chilling normalcy of their lives continuing while mine was ripped apart. The next morning, I even heard Raphael's voice, still there, chatting with my father as if nothing was amiss, as if their daughter wasn't locked like an animal in the cellar. That evening, my mother slipped some food under the door. I begged her through the crack, pleaded for her to let me go. Her voice was a fragile whisper. "You need to cooperate. Your father invested everything in this deal. Our family will be ruined if you don't agree." When I demanded how she could let this happen to her own daughter, she just uttered those chilling words. "Sometimes women have to make sacrifices for the family." Then she was gone. By the second day, a cold dread had begun to set in. Raphael's voice was a constant presence upstairs, punctuated by my father's business talk. They were finalizing details, making plans, acting as if I'd already agreed. It hit me. They weren't going to let me out until I gave in. That night my father came down. He slid a stack of papers under the door. A marriage contract. Read them over, he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. You'll be signing them tomorrow whether you want to or not. Raphael's being generous, considering your behavior. Then he said it, the phrase that would burn into my memory forever. You're worth $2 million to this family, and you will not ruin this deal. I sat in that suffocating darkness, the damp, cold seeping into my bones, and I finally understood. I had never been a daughter to him. Just an asset. Something to trade. Property. It was Hayden, my brave, terrified younger brother, who finally let me out after 48 agonizing hours. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. I couldn't take it anymore, he whispered, gesturing to the door. Hearing you cry. He told me our father and Raphael had gone to the bank to set up the accounts for their business merger. You need to run, he urged. I'll give you a head start before I tell them. But when I stumbled upstairs, my legs weak and shaky, I saw them. On the dining table, spread out for everyone to see. The marriage contract. Already signed. My father had forged my signature. Something broke inside me then. Not my spirit, not entirely, but the naive part that still believed in fairness, in fighting back with words. I knew screaming and struggling wouldn't work. They'd just lock me up again, perhaps somewhere even worse. So, when they returned, I forced myself to put on a performance. I pretended to be defeated. I apologized to Raphael, my voice sickeningly sweet, claiming I'd been overwhelmed and understood now. The relief that washed over my father's face was utterly disgusting. Raphael looked smug, a victor. My mother hugged me, whispering a tearful thank you in my ear, as if I'd done her a massive favor. Only Hayden looked genuinely sick about the whole charade. The wedding was set for 3 months later. 3 months. More than enough time for me to plan. Those 3 months were the longest, most suffocating period of my life. Every morning, I'd wake up with a crushing weight on my chest, feeling like I couldn't breathe, constantly reminded that I was trapped in a house with people who were actively trying to sell me. Raphael started showing up almost every day. He'd bring gifts, always jewelry, expensive, yes, but each piece felt less like a present and more like a symbol of his possessive control. Necklaces that felt like collars. Bracelets that were too tight like shackles. He'd watch me with those chilling eyes while I forced a grateful smile, my skin crawling every time he touched me. A hand resting on my lower back, lingering just a bit too long. He'd talk about our future home. This grand mansion outside the city where I'd be comfortable, while he worked. Comfortable, I thought. Like a pet in a very nice, very gilded cage. My father. He treated the entire engagement like a business transaction he'd brilliantly closed. He'd talk about me in the third person when Raphael was around. Oh, she's always been good with numbers. Or, she really knows how to entertain guests properly. Literally selling my features as if I were a product on display. One night, I overheard him assuring Raphael that I'd settle down once the wedding was done, and he shouldn't worry about my temporary attitude problem. My mother tried to play both sides, it seemed. She'd slip into my room at night, her eyes wide and sad, telling me she understood how hard this was. But then in the very next breath, she'd be flipping through wedding magazines, excitedly pointing out centerpieces and table settings, gushing about how Raphael could provide such a good life for me. When I finally broke down and asked her how she could do this, how she could let it happen, she simply said, "Marriage is about building a future. Not silly things like love or attraction. I learned to appreciate your father over time." That was when it hit me. She'd been through something similar. Maybe not as extreme, but she'd been traded, too. Hayden was the only one who seemed to grasp how utterly messed up it all was. During dinners, when Raphael would say something particularly disgusting about training me to run his household, Hayden would shoot me these worried, angry looks. We started having whispered conversations when no one else was around. He was only 19, still financially dependent on our parents, terrified of our father, but he desperately wanted to help. I knew I had to escape before that wedding, but it wasn't as simple as just running away. My father had frozen my bank accounts, calling it protecting my future interests. He'd taken my passport and ID, claiming it was for safekeeping, while they prepared the marriage license paperwork. Raphael had even hired a wedding planner who, it quickly became clear, was watching me, reporting back on my every move. I wasn't even allowed to go anywhere alone anymore. Always with my mother or the planner. So I started small. I told Raphael I wanted to prove I could be a good wife, and asked to help with some of his business paperwork. He loved that. He truly believed I was finally accepting my role. It gave me access to his contact information, allowed me to learn his routines, figure out when he'd be unreachable. I started pretending I was getting excited about the wedding, deliberately bringing up details just to get my father to leave the room for urgent business calls. That gave me precious moments to search his office. That's when I found it. Evidence. My father was in serious financial trouble. His company was failing, had been for years. Raphael's merger wasn't just adding money. It was saving my father from complete, utter bankruptcy. That's why he was so desperate. Why he was willing to sell his own daughter. $2 million wasn't profit. It was survival. The worst part of those months perhaps was wedding dress shopping. Standing there in those pristine white gowns, while my mother and the wedding planner cooed and cried about how beautiful I looked. All I could think was how I was being dressed up for my own funeral. Raphael even insisted on seeing photos of each dress, texting back his opinions like he had every right. The neckline should be lower. I want to see more skin. And my mother would just nod, calling for alterations. Every single night, I'd lock my bedroom door, push furniture against it, and cry silently into my pillow until I was exhausted. The wedding invitations went out, a physical manifestation of my impending doom. People started calling to congratulate me, old friends from high school messaging about how lucky I was to marry such a wealthy man. Nobody questioned the age gap. Nobody asked if I was truly okay with it. They just saw the money. Hayden, bless him, was the one who helped me get my ID back. He created this massive, screaming fight with our father as a distraction, while I snuck into his office and broke into his safe. I couldn't get my passport, but at least I had my driver's license. I started slowly collecting cash, tiny amounts my mother wouldn't notice missing from her purse. I even sold some of the jewelry Raphael had given me, pawn shops 2 towns over, when I was supposedly at dress fittings. Things escalated when Raphael decided he needed to prepare me for married life. He started having these private dinners, quizzing me on his preferences, telling me exactly how he liked his house run, what he expected from a wife. He declared I wouldn't be returning to university once we were married, claiming educated women made poor mothers. He expected children within the first year. He sat too close. He touched my thigh under the table, ignoring my involuntary flinch. One night he tried to kiss me. When I turned my face away, he pushed me against the wall, murmuring, "You need to get used to it. We'll be doing much more than kissing after the wedding." I had to force myself not to fight back, to just freeze instead of pushing him away. I couldn't risk him telling my father I was still resistant. I just stood there, enduring his disgusting wet mouth on my neck, his hands gripping my waist too hard, praying for it to end. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard them, Raphael and my father, talking about metrics. They'd already decided where I would live, what I would wear, even what I would be allowed to eat. Raphael was telling my father he didn't want me getting fat after the wedding, that he'd have his housekeeper monitor my meals. They were discussing me like a show dog that needed to maintain its appearance. That was it. That was the final crack. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up. I sat on the cold tile floor, shaking, the reality crashing down. I was out of time, out of options. In less than 48 hours, I would be legally bound to this man. I would be taken to his house where no one would hear me scream, where I would be completely, utterly trapped. That night I made a new plan. A desperate one. If I couldn't escape, then I had to make Raphael back out. I had to make him decide I wasn't worth the investment after all. The rehearsal dinner was at this ridiculously expensive restaurant Raphael had rented out completely. All his business associates were there, people from my father's company, extended family, all staring at me with either envy or perhaps pity. I sat next to Raphael at the main table, his hand a constant, unwelcome presence on my knee under the tablecloth, squeezing tightly every time I instinctively shifted away. I waited until everyone was settled, until all eyes were on us. Raphael finally stood to make a toast, his voice oozing with self-satisfaction. He rambled about how excited he was to welcome me into his life, How grateful he was to my father for entrusting him with his greatest treasure. That's when I stood up. I looked around at all those faces, a kaleidoscope of expectations and judgments, and in the clearest, steadiest voice I had ever managed, I said, I need everyone here to know that I'm being forced into this marriage. That my father locked me in our basement for 2 days when I refused Raphael's proposal. That he forged my signature on the marriage contract. That Raphael is paying him $2 million to marry me against my will. The room went completely, utterly silent. Raphael's face twisted into something truly terrifying. My father half rose from his chair. His face a mottled purple with rage, but I kept going. I told them everything. How Raphael talked about training me, the written criteria for being a good wife, how they'd taken my documents, controlled my movements, planned out every single aspect of my future without my consent. I finished by looking directly at Raphael's most prominent business partners, my voice ringing with a desperate plea for justice. Is this really the kind of man you want to be associated with? Someone who has to buy a wife, who locks up women who say no to him. My father was across the room in seconds, his grip like a vice on my arm, bruising me instantly. He hissed, You need to shut your fucking mouth. Raphael, meanwhile, was trying to laugh it off, stammering about how I was emotional about the wedding, just had cold feet. But I could see it in people's faces, the shock, the discomfort. Some of the women looked physically ill. One of Raphael's older, more respected colleagues was staring at him with undisguised disgust. My father practically dragged me out of that restaurant, throwing me into the car. The entire ride home was consumed by a terrible, suffocating silence that terrified me more than any of his yelling ever had. My mother was crying, a broken heap in the back seat. Hayden looked a strange mix of both proud and absolutely scared out of his mind. When we got home, my father snapped. He grabbed me by the hair, dragging me towards the basement door, screaming that I'd ruined everything, that I'd destroyed our family, that I was nothing but an ungrateful bitch who'd rather wreck her family than do her duty. Hayden, bless his heart, tried to stop him. He actually tackled our father to the ground. They fought, a chaotic, terrifying mess, while I scrambled away, ran to my room and locked the door behind me. I could still hear them fighting, furniture breaking, my mother screaming for them to stop. I sat with my back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. I didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if my desperate plan had worked, or if I had just made everything infinitely, catastrophically worse. All I knew was that I couldn't take back what I'd done, couldn't unsay those words. My phone started blowing up. Texts from Raphael, each one more threatening than the last. He called me a lying bitch, vowed I would regret humiliating him. He promised no one, made a fool of him and got away with it, swore he would make sure I had nothing and no one when he was done with me. Then my father started pounding on my door, the wood splintering as he threw his full weight against it, screaming that he would kill me himself before he let me ruin everything he'd worked for. I spent that night barricaded in my room, listening to my father rage through the house. He eventually stopped trying to break down my door after Hayden, bless him, called the police. But I could still hear him downstairs smashing things, screaming about ungrateful children and family loyalty. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with Raphael's texts, threats mixed with bizarre attempts to salvage the situation. One minute he was promising to destroy me, the next offering to forgive me if I apologized publicly, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. The police came. They talked to everyone. My father somehow pulled himself together, smoothed his ruffled feathers, and spun a tale about a family disagreement and wedding stress. They didn't even ask to speak to me separately. They just accepted his explanation and left. Classic, utterly useless cops. Saw a nice house in a good neighborhood and assumed nothing truly bad could possibly happen there. Hayden slept on the floor outside my door that night. He swore he wasn't going to let anyone get to me. I could hear my mother crying in her bedroom, my father's voice rising and falling as he alternated between threatening her and pleading with her to fix this mess. Morning came and the house was eerily quiet. I was terrified to come out, but eventually hunger and the desperate need for a bathroom, that wasn't my own room's tiny one, forced me to unlock the door. I found Hayden still there, bleary-eyed but determined. He walked with me downstairs, positioning himself between me and any potential threat. The house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Broken glass everywhere. Pictures knocked off walls, furniture overturned. But no sign of my parents. Hayden said they'd left early. Heard the car pull out around 5 a.m. Neither of us knew where they'd gone, but I had a sickening feeling it involved Raphael. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I needed to know what was happening. I called my mother, no answer. My father, straight to voicemail. Finally, I texted a cousin who was supposed to be in the wedding party. She responded immediately. The wedding was still on. My parents were telling everyone I'd had a nervous breakdown, but would be better in time for the ceremony. They were lying to everyone, spinning a story where I was mentally unstable, rather than being sold like property. I felt like I was going to pass out. Hayden made me sit down, brought me water, kept saying we'd figure this out. But I could see the fear in his eyes too. We were just kids, really. Me at 21, him at 19. What could we possibly do against the full force of our father's twisted determination? That's when Raphael called. I almost didn't answer, but something, a gut feeling, told me I needed to know what he was planning. He told me he'd spoken with my father, that they'd come to an understanding about my outburst. He claimed he was still willing to go through with the wedding, because he understood that women sometimes get emotional. Then his voice changed, got harder, colder. He said if I didn't show up tomorrow, properly apologetic and ready to be a good wife, he would make sure my father lost everything. He would make sure Hayden lost his college fund, his future. He swore he had enough influence to destroy our entire family. I spent the next hours in a blind panic trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't run. I had nowhere to go, no money. And now Raphael would be watching for that. I couldn't stay. My father would literally drag me to that altar if he had to. I felt completely, utterly trapped. Hayden and I were still desperately trying to come up with any plan when our parents finally came home. My father looked different. Not raging anymore, but something colder, more calculated. My mother wouldn't even look at me. They sat us down in what was left of the living room, and my father, in a chillingly calm voice, explained the new arrangement. The wedding would proceed as planned. Raphael had generously agreed to overlook my emotional outburst, on the condition that I make a public statement claiming I'd been under stress and hadn't meant what I said. I would apologize to his business associates. I would be a model wife. In exchange, Raphael would still pay the $2 million, and our family business would be saved. If I refused, Raphael would not only withdraw his offer but would use his connections to ensure my father's business failed completely. He would make sure no bank would ever loan to us again. He would ruin Hayden's chances at any decent job in the future. My father delivered this ultimatum like he was reading a business proposal, not describing the sale of his daughter's life. I looked at my mother, begging her with my eyes to help me, to do something. She just stared at the floor, her voice a barely audible whisper. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for family. You need to be strong. You will adjust eventually. That's when I truly, deeply understood. There was no escape. No help was coming. No one who would stand up for me except Hayden, who was as trapped as I was. Something cracked inside me. Not breaking, no. It was hardening. I realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop hoping for rescue and start thinking differently. I told my father I needed time to think. He looked suspicious, but said I had until morning to come to my senses. He warned me not to try running again. Raphael's hired people to watch the house, he snarled, to make sure his investment is secure. Back in my room, I sat on my bed, staring at the wall for hours, thinking about the life ahead of me. Being owned by Raphael, bearing his children, slowly dying inside while everyone pretended it was normal. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But I couldn't see a way out that didn't also destroy everyone else I cared about. Hayden came in around midnight, silently sitting beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he asked if I remembered when we were kids, and we'd make escape plans for zombie apocalypses or alien invasions. How we always promised we'd stick together no matter what. I started crying then, and he said, his voice thick, "I can't watch this happen to you. I'd rather give up my future than see you sacrificed." That's when the idea came to me. I told Hayden we needed to find leverage. Something that would make Raphael back off without destroying our family in the process. If this was a business deal to them, we needed to make me a bad investment. We spent the rest of the night digging through everything we could find. My father's business files, old emails, financial records Hayden could access through the family computer. We were looking for anything we could use. We found plenty of evidence of my father's financial troubles, but nothing that would really hurt Raphael. Morning came too quickly. I could hear my parents moving around downstairs, my mother calling up that it was time to start getting ready. The wedding planner would be arriving soon to help me dress, do my hair, make sure I looked perfect for my sale. That's when Hayden found it. An old email thread buried deep in my father's archives. Conversations between him and Raphael going back 3 years. 3 years. They'd been planning this. Planning my marriage since I was 18. Discussing how to prepare me for the idea. Raphael talking about how he'd had his eye on me since I was 16 at my father's company picnic. My father responding with suggestions on how to maximize the arrangement. Never once discussing what I might want. Just calculating the best time to cash in on their investment. I felt physically sick reading it. Raphael had been watching me waiting since I was a minor. He'd been plotting with my father while I was still legally a child. My hands trembled as I took screenshots of everything. Sent them to my email, to Hayden's email, to a new account I created just for backup. I went downstairs, found my parents, and told them I needed to speak to Raphael before the ceremony. I needed to apologize properly, in private. My father looked visibly relieved. He thought I'd finally given in. He called Raphael immediately to arrange it. Raphael arrived looking incredibly smug, like he'd definitively won. My father, with a final sickening courtesy, left us alone in the study, delivering me to my new owner. As soon as the door closed, Raphael's facade dropped. He snarled, "I'm going to make you pay for every second of embarrassment you've caused me. Once we're married, you'll learn exactly what happens to disobedient wives." I just looked at him calmly and showed him the emails. I watched his face change, the smugness draining away, replaced by dawning horror as he realized what I had. I told him, if he didn't walk away from this wedding, from our family completely, these emails would go to every single business associate he had, to the press, to anyone who might be interested in knowing he'd been planning to acquire a teenage girl through her father. It might not be technically illegal, since nothing explicitly happened while I was underage, but it would absolutely destroy his reputation. No one would do business with him again. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back, holding it out of reach, and told him, "It's already backed up. In multiple places. Hayden has copies too, with instructions on what to do if anything happens to me." For the very first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I demanded he call off the wedding, return any contracts my father had signed, and walk away completely. He tried to argue, to threaten, but I just kept my finger hovering over the send button on an email address to his entire contact list. Finally, he broke. He agreed to everything. I watched him leave, still unable to believe it had actually worked. My father came in moments later, his face ashen. Raphael had told him everything was off. No merger. No money. No wedding. He lost it. He started screaming at me, saying I'd destroyed our family, demanding to know what I'd done, what I'd said to make Raphael back out. I just looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework, and then tried to sell me like livestock. And I felt nothing but pity. "I know about the emails," I told him. "I know you've been planning this for years." I saw the shock on his face, then the rapid calculation as he tried to figure out how to spin this, how to justify it. I cut him off before he could even start. "You have a choice to make," I said, my voice steady. "You can let me go. Let me go back to university, to my own life. Or I can send those emails to everyone. I can destroy your reputation the way you nearly destroyed my life." My mother was crying in the doorway, Hayden standing stoically behind her. My father looked at them, then back at me, and asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" As if I was the one hurting him. As if he was the victim here. That's when my mother finally found her voice. Her whole body trembled, but she spoke with a strength I'd never heard. "Enough was enough," she declared. She said she'd stood by while he gambled away their future, while he made bad business decisions, while he tried to solve his problems by selling their daughter. But she wouldn't watch him blame me for his failures. The next few hours were a blur. Calls canceling the wedding. Guests being told there was a family emergency. Raphael's things being swiftly removed from our house. My father locked himself in his study, refusing to speak to any of us. My mother moved silently through the house, looking both utterly relieved and absolutely terrified about what would happen next. That night I packed my things. I couldn't stay there anymore, not a moment longer. Hayden helped me load my car, made me promise to call him the second I reached my friend's place. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, a promise of loyalty in his embrace. My mother stood in the driveway watching, tears streaming down her face. She whispered she was sorry, that she should have protected me, that she'd been weak. I couldn't forgive her yet, but I told her, maybe someday. My father never came out to say goodbye. I could see him watching from his study window as I drove away. I don't know if he was angry, ashamed, or just calculating his next move. I didn't care anymore. It's been 6 months since then. I'm back at university finishing my degree. My father's company eventually failed. Turns out Raphael made sure of that, his final petty act of revenge. My parents had to sell the house, move to something smaller. My mother calls sometimes, tentatively trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. My father, he never calls. Hayden moved in with me. He transferred to a college nearby. Says he couldn't stay in that house after everything that happened. I still have the screenshots just in case Raphael ever decides to try again. But mostly, I try to focus on building a life that belongs only to me. A life that no one can ever buy or sell. It was a horrifying ordeal, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I'm still here and I fought for my freedom. I want to know, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Have you ever had to fight for your autonomy against your own family? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think.